Most conspiracy theories are nothing more than the work of the imagination. But on some occasions, disturbing information comes to light, revealing that those theories are far closer to the truth than anybody believed. Number 10. Pilots coming in to land at the Evergreen Maintenance Center in Arizona often got the feeling that there was something amiss about the airfield. Some reported getting armed escorts straight to the departure runway with no chance of stopping to refuel before being set on their way. Others warned that it was a military facility and to not bother trying to stop here. The reports added to the rumors that had been growing about Evergreen International Aviation ever since it was founded in the 1970s. The conspiracy theories stated that the aviation company was nothing more than a front for the CIA. The theory was a lot closer to the truth than the company's founders would ever admit. Evergreen was founded by Del Smith, a pilot and Air Force veteran. The company started with just a few helicopters, but at the same time, Smith was looking to expand, and other companies were suddenly selling their vehicles. Decades earlier, the CIA had begun to grow their own air fleet. These aircraft were operated through several front businesses, and even the CIA themselves were uncertain of just how many aircraft they were operating. When the truth of the front businesses was revealed in the 1970s, many of the aircraft were sold off. Evergreen picked up the operating certificate of one of the front businesses the CIA was getting rid of, and merged the company with another CIA front to form part of Evergreen's growing service. Officially, that was where involvement with the CIA ended, but Evergreen remained in good standing with the US government and flew many operations for the government. These ranged from supporting aid agencies in military hotspots to flying missions to Mexico to destroy farms growing illegal substances. Outside observers noticed that the company seemed to be wherever trouble was, and conspiracy theories about Evergreen being a CIA front started to grow. In particular, the company's operations in Central America were beginning to attract attention. In the early 1980s, Evergreen began doing work in El Salvador. Officially, the company was just there to fly electrical workers to downed power lines, but many suspected this might have been part of the US government's involvement in the Salvadoran Civil War. Evergreen offices were picketed, and the company denied any involvement in espionage activity. In 1988, local newspaper The Oregonian did its own investigation into the matter. In a multi-part story titled The Evergreen Story, the newspaper revealed just how close the company and the CIA actually were. In El Salvador, the helicopters had been used to ferry electrical workers. They'd also been used by El Salvador's president, José Napoleón Duarte, to travel to meetings with rebels and on a mission to rescue Duarte's daughter after she was captured by rebels. Duarte wasn't the only foreign leader who'd used Evergreen's services. In 1980, the company had flown the deposed Shah of Iran from Panama to Egypt just before Panama received any extradition request from the Shah's former country. Despite the details uncovered by the Oregonian and others, the company continued to deny any CIA links. Del Smith claimed that if the CIA was using his helicopters for covert missions, he had no knowledge of this. Years later, he claimed that he knew none of his aircraft were being used by the intelligence service for extraordinary rendition. Even as the evidence became too much to ignore, and the conspiracy theory was confirmed as true, Smith continued to deny. He passed away in 2014, shortly after Evergreen ceased operations. Number 9. For decades, residents of Greenbrier County in West Virginia had heard rumors about a secret bunker built beneath a luxury resort. The managers at the resort dismissed the rumors as nothing more than conspiracy theories and pointed out just how ludicrous the theories were. But in 1992, an expose in the Washington Post revealed that this conspiracy was real. The Greenbrier Hotel is a luxury resort nestled in the Allegheny Mountains and about an hour from Washington, D.C. by plane. Since it opened in the 1970s, it's become a popular destination for the rich and powerful. Many politicians had taken the time to stay at the hotel and to relax in its supposedly healing waters. The resort boasted meeting rooms that were perfect for political parties to come and meet away from any distractions. During the Second World War, the Greenbrier's connection to the government became more official. It was used to intern diplomats from Japan, Italy, and Germany, and later as a military hospital. But after the end of the war, the building was returned to civilian hands, and most of the outside world seemed to be nothing more than another high-end resort. But when Greenbrier began to build a new wing, construction workers started to question whether this was really as innocent as they were being told. Construction on the West Virginia wing began in 1959. The first sign that anything unusual was happening here was the foundations, which were dug much deeper into the ground than any typical building. An enormous amount of concrete was then shipped to the construction site. The company built the facility and even purchased more trucks to keep up with the demand, but they were still strained to their limit. Other than the large amounts of concrete, construction workers could point to other things that made them believe in the conspiracy theories. Walls in the below-ground facilities were extremely thick. Specially constructed doors, built by safe manufacturers, were shipped into the facility, and there was a strangely large number of men's bathroom facilities. Construction was completed in 1962, just in time for the Cuban Missile Crisis. By now, many residents in the local area believed the conspiracy theory that there was a secret bunker built under the new wing, and many expected the arrival of officials as the crisis became more and more serious. But the crisis passed without the Cold War becoming hot, and life returned to relatively normal. Rumors continued to spread in the community. At one point, a pair of hunters arrived in the area and began to inquire about the mysterious facility. They were given so much information that they were able to give a reasonable description of what had actually been hidden from the public eyes. The hunters had actually been government officials sent to Greenbrier to assess just how much the public knew about the bunker that was actually hidden beneath the hotel. They had learned so much that they had to be given top-secret clearance after their mission. The conspiracy theories about a hidden bunker were true. Number 8. In the 1960s, U.S. military personnel were the unknowing human subjects in potentially dangerous tests of biological and chemical weapons. Even today, the exact details of Project Shad remain top secret, but for decades, even the existence of these tests was considered a conspiracy theory. As more information is released, many participants are still left with more questions than answers. In the 1960s, it wasn't only the threat of nuclear weapons that worried the United States government and military. Some chemical weapons had been banned after the First World War, but it wouldn't be until the 1990s that stricter rules were put into place. Biological weapons weren't banned until the 1970s. Until then, the United States was preparing its troops for what might happen if one of these weapons were to be used by the enemy. Project Shad was just one of the ways the government was trying to do that. Shad stood for Shipboard Hazard and Defense. The project was part of a larger series of experiments to determine the effects of various chemical and biological agents under a variety of circumstances. As the name would suggest, Shad focused specifically on ships. The government and the military wanted to know just how effective ship-based protections against these agents were, how well-equipped soldiers were at detecting an attack, and whether the ships themselves could continue operating in the event of an attack. Between 1962 and 1973, over 100 tests were planned. Exactly how many of these were actually carried out is unknown, but the reported results suggest just 43 tests actually went ahead. These tests usually involved a plane dropping the contaminants on a ship, simulating an attack by an enemy aircraft. For the most part, the tests were conducted using what was described as harmless stimulants. These would mimic the dispersal of agents like anthrax or E. coli, and could be traced by researchers determining how well the agents spread. But in some tests, actual agents were used. These included the toxic nerve agent sarin, a chemical able to inflict mass casualties in a matter of minutes. Despite just how dangerous these tests seemed when they were eventually revealed to the public, the Department of Defense claimed that nobody involved fell ill. There seemed to be no negative effects. Veterans who'd been involved in the tests often disagreed. Thousands of people, often Navy and Marine personnel, were involved in the tests. Some knew what the tests involved, but many were unaware and wouldn't learn about the danger that they had faced until years or even decades later. Some veterans were unaware of their participation in Project SHOT at all until the studies in the 2000s. Some veterans claimed to be suffering from debilitating conditions and traced these back to their exposure to the dangerous chemicals in the 1960s. But the details of these tests have not all been revealed, even to researchers. The government claimed that some of these documents remained classified as they revealed vulnerabilities that had been uncovered by the tests. Some suspected that the details might explain some of the health problems Project SHOT veterans are reporting. Number 7. Truth serums are popular tropes in fiction, especially stories involving spies and top-secret government forces. The reality is, there's no such thing as a truth serum. But that hasn't stopped conspiracy theorists from believing that some government agencies have been working on research to find a chemical that forces someone to reveal their deepest secrets under interrogation. While the serum may never have been perfected, declassified documents showed that the US government was working on just such a substance in the 1950s. Interest in developing a truth serum began after the Second World War. US intelligence had found evidence that the Soviet government was developing a mind-altering substance that forced its users to reveal the truth. Not wanting to fall behind in this chemical arms race, various US agencies began work to develop something similar. In the Navy, this was Project Chatter. Project Chatter was spearheaded by Dr. Charles Savage of the Naval Medical Research Institute in Bethesda, Maryland. In 1947, there were lots of potential chemicals and substances that the researchers could investigate. But intelligence gathered by German scientists in World War II convinced project leaders to focus on mescaline. Mescaline is a psychedelic substance found in a specific kind of cacti. During the war, German scientists had experimented with the substance on prisoners. The results were not promising, and the research was abandoned, but for unknown reasons, the US scientists believed there was more to be unlocked. Rather than forcing a person to only tell the truth, scientists believed that the chemical could suppress a subject's ego control. This meant that they'd be less likely to hold back information or stop themselves from saying something they might regret later. Mescaline and other similar chemicals were administered to unsuspecting test subjects at a military hospital. The test subjects had come for treatment for their mental health. Savage and the other doctors did believe there was potential for the chemical to help treat depression. The psychedelic effects were believed to create euphoria in some patients, which was believed to be one way of combating depression. But the main goal of the tests was to determine if the concoctions would work as an effective truth serum. Project Chatter expanded during the Korean War, even as the results showed that the scientists were no closer to finding a truth serum than they had been at the start of the project. While some patients did become more relaxed and talkative, the side effects of the substances meant that a lot of what was said wasn't actually useful. Sometimes a test subject would struggle to even speak at all. After the Korean War, Project Chatter was phased out. By this point, the much more famous MK Ultra was already underway, and it had many of the same goals as Project Chatter. The research from the earlier experiments was put to use in more famous secret programs, and Project Chatter was largely forgotten. Number 6. As militaries around the world develop top-secret weapons, it's not surprising that there are many conspiracy theories claiming that weapons that sound like science fiction devices are actually real and in use today. One of the most bizarre of these stories is one that's been described as a military urban legend, a voice of God weapon that could supposedly speak to individual enemies without being detected by anyone else. The story of the voice of God weapon appears every few years, but developing technology suggests there might be more to this than fiction. A 1999 New Scientist article relayed a typical story about the Voice of God device. The device was explained to the journalist by an industry expert at a party, who later refused to go into any more detail or help point the writer in the direction of more information. According to this insider, the weapon was being developed by military scientists at a laboratory in the US desert. By crossing two high-intensity laser beams together, the scientists could turn normal air particles into a ball of glowing plasma. This was done by stripping the electrons from normal atoms, a process that could create a lot of noise. By manipulating the levels of these lasers, the scientists could change the noises and eventually create sounds that resembled human speech. The impact of such a device would obviously terrify any unsuspecting person who came across it. The imagery resembles the sort of thing that appears in religious texts, and voices with no discernible source would allow the viewer's imagination to run wild. It also resembles the sort of thing that the US military is known to have done in the past. During the Vietnam War, loudspeakers were hidden in the jungle, playing special tapes directed at the Viet Cong. The tapes played eerie sounds, and voices claimed to be the ghosts of Viet Cong soldiers who'd fallen in battle. The effectiveness of this strategy has been debated, but it shows some precedent for the US military trying to scare its enemy with unexplained sounds. Other versions of the voice of God weapon don't include the glowing ball of plasma. Instead, the plasma is manipulated by a second laser beam, which allows the person wielding the device to create sounds directly inside the mind of a single enemy combatant. Despite the repeated stories about these weapons, there's little evidence that this laser beam and plasma weapon actually exists. But that hasn't stopped the government from creating weapons that do use sound to suppress and harass enemies. Number 5. One of the biggest and most popular conspiracy theories believed by many people is that governments around the world are holding back knowledge of UFOs or alien visitations to Earth. The truth is often more complicated than the conspiracy theory suggests. But almost every year, new records released by various governments have proven that there really have been instances of things in the sky that we can't really explain. In recent years, one of the most famous of these disclosures came in 2010 and claimed that UK wartime leader Winston Churchill ordered the cover-up of a UFO sighting. The Ministry of Defense had released a series of documents revealing letters sent from the public to the government agency seeking clarity on UFO and alien sightings. Many of these could be dismissed as hoaxes, or people mistaking something mundane as extraterrestrial. But the Churchill letter grabbed more attention. According to the story, an RAF crew had been on its way back from a raid over Germany when it spotted something strange in British airspace. The object was arrow-shaped and appeared metallic. It wasn't like any plane they had ever seen before. After landing, the crew told officials. The information was passed up the chain of command, and eventually Churchill and General Dwight Eisenhower were briefed on the sighting. The strange object apparently shook Churchill so much that he ordered the story to be immediately classified. He claimed it would cause panic and shatter people's religious views. The story wasn't to be made public again for at least 50 years. While the story grabbed headlines around the world, there's little evidence that this actually happened. What was actually released was a letter from a member of the public recounting the story. He claimed to have heard it secondhand from his grandfather, who was a bodyguard in the room at the time of the briefing. He'd been worried about breaking any official secrets, and told the story once to his daughter, who in turn passed it on to her son. That son was now writing to the Ministry of Defense for clarification that it actually happened. The ministry wrote back, and there were no sealed documents related to wartime UFO sightings, but they also admitted that many of the documents from before the 70s were destroyed after just 5 years. This leaves the exact cause of that UFO sighting unsolved. Number 4. Most people today are aware of the dangers of smoking. Tobacco products have been linked to several diseases and health conditions, and many governments around the world have some kind of restrictions in place to make people aware of these dangers. But this wasn't always the case. It was decades after the first evidence tying smoking to lung cancer that the tobacco industry admitted the dangers. Many people believed there was some kind of conspiracy involving these multinational companies to keep the public from knowing the truth. In the 1990s, a court ruling released thousands of documents held by the tobacco companies, revealing the truth behind such a conspiracy. It began in the 1950s. Ever since the 1920s, when cigarettes and similar products began to become popular, the rates of conditions like lung cancer have increased around the world. Doctors and scientists have found evidence tying the two trends together. By the 1950s, research proving this connection was beginning to be published, and the tobacco industry knew that it would have to respond. In 1953, the president of the American Tobacco Company invited his counterparts at other leading tobacco companies to a meeting to discuss the issue. The companies had a few different options at this point. They could admit the dangers of smoking and work to try to create a product that they could claim was safer than their competitors. But there was another, more nefarious option. Denying the scientific research completely wasn't possible. The public at the time was more trusting of scientists, and denying the evidence outright would only make the companies look out of touch. Instead, they created skepticism around the science. Rather than denying the scientific research, they suggested that more research needed to be done. Scientists who had expressed skepticism about the cancer studies were hired to research other potential causes for the rise in cancer rates. The tobacco industry looked from the outside as if it were dedicated to getting to the bottom of the mystery, but in reality, they were obscuring the fact that the answer to the mystery had already been found. In the 1970s, this conspiracy between different companies even earned a code name, Operation Berkshire. The companies agreed again to keep their stance that smoking wasn't dangerous, and produced multiple advertising campaigns to this effect. The outcome of this was that consumers didn't know if they could believe the stories about the dangers of smoking or not. Many people who might have otherwise avoided tobacco products then took up the habit. Altogether, the conspiracy meant that action against smoking was pushed back decades, and an unknown number of people who might have otherwise chosen not to smoke developed a habit that would cause damage to their lungs, heart, and the rest of their body. Number 3. There are few events surrounded by more conspiracies than the annual meeting of the Bohemian Club at a secluded Californian summer camp. Bohemian Grove has been the subject of conspiracy theories for decades and has fueled other theories that suggest some secret group of elite individuals is shaping the world to their whims. The truth behind the Bohemian Grove annual meetings is more mundane and stranger than the conspiracy theories would suggest. But on at least one occasion, the fate of the world was shaped here. Most accounts of what really goes on inside Bohemian Grove depict something more like a camping trip for the rich and powerful than any secret society. The Bohemian Club is open only to the most rich and powerful men. Once a year, the club secludes itself in a campground in Monterey, California, for a 2-week-long encampment. Members are allowed to bring guests, including women, but women must leave the grounds in the evening. Journalists and anybody who might report what goes on at the Grove are strictly prohibited. Despite these rules, some information has leaked out. Some, including famous conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, have managed to sneak into the site to reveal information. Other information comes from seasonal staff, who are hired to work at the bar and restaurants on site. Most stories from the Grove involve the men letting loose and showing none of the care that they would be expected to in general society. But an annual ritual has helped fuel theories that something demonic happens at the Grove. The ritual involves burning an effigy in front of a giant owl statue. It's supposed to represent leaving behind thoughts of the outside world, and goes along with the Grove's motto, "Weaving spiders not come here." While many outsiders worry about secret business dealings and political decisions happening outside the public eye, these are supposed to be banned from the Grove. But that didn't stop one secretive meeting from happening in September of 1942. The Second World War hadn't stopped the Bohemian Club from meeting, but among the regular faces of the rich and powerful were a few individuals that wouldn't be known until years later. Enclosed in the clubhouse were a group of scientists and government officials, including Robert Oppenheimer. It was here that Oppenheimer met for the first time with the S1 Executive Committee, the group that would go on to lead the infamous Manhattan Project. It wouldn't be long before the project itself got underway. There was a lot of planning and logistics that went into the Manhattan Project, and exactly what was decided at Bohemian Grove remains a mystery to this day. But it was here that the foundations were laid for one of the biggest secrets of the 20th century. Number 2. The idea that governments might be testing weapons on their unknowing citizens is a terrifying conspiracy theory. that would have been more even terrifying during the Cold War, when threats from new and unusual weapons were at their height. In the 1990s, documents released by the UK military revealed that there was some truth behind the conspiracy theory, and hinted at more experiments that may remain top secret to this day. Porton Down is a Ministry of Defence laboratory located in Wiltshire in the south of England. The site was founded during the First World War to do research into chemical weapons in response to German forces bringing those weapons to the battlefield. With around 7,000 acres of land at their disposal, scientists could conduct experiments into various weapons away from the public eye. But in the 1950s, they realized that the experiments had outgrown the site. They needed data from a much larger area. Specifically, scientists wanted to know how effective a chemical or biological weapon launched from a ship in the English Channel might be, and how well their equipment was at detecting such an attack. These objectives inspired the Dorset biological warfare experiments. On the afternoon of November 14, 1963, experimental trials vessel Ice Whale left its harbor at the Portland Naval Base, just off the coast of Dorset, and headed west across Lyme Bay. As it crossed the stretch of water, it sprayed an aerosol cloud of live bacteria from its stern. The wind blew the cloud inland, over Dorset, and deep into mainland England. Across the path of the cloud, teams rushed to detect the bacteria and take samples. The first of the experiments had been a success. Over the next 5 months, about a dozen more tests were conducted. All except the first trial of the experiment was conducted under the cover of darkness. Lyme Bay has been chosen for 3 specific reasons. Its semicircle shape meant that the tests could be conducted using almost any wind direction. The bay was in close proximity to Portland, a tide island that had long been the home of military forces. It was also not far from Porton Down itself. One factor that wasn't considered was the proximity to civilian settlements. This part of England isn't the most densely populated, but there were still significant towns that would be in the path of any bacteria cloud spread from the bay. The people living in the path of the cloud weren't warned about the experiments. They wouldn't be told at all until decades later. Many of the experiments didn't actually use bacteria, and instead, scientists sprayed the unknowing citizens with zinc cadmium sulfate, a chemical that was often used in place of bacteria. It could be easily traced and was thought to be harmless, but later research showed that repeated exposure could lead to health problems. But some experiments needed to use live bacteria. In these cases, 2 types of bacteria were used. The first was Bacilla subtilis, a bacterium that's generally considered to be safe for humans. The second was E. coli, a common bacterium known to cause health problems when ingested. Over the course of 2 years, dozens of experiments took place. They revealed important information about how different air conditions affected the bacteria and how well different detection mechanisms worked. When the top secret experiments were eventually revealed to the public, there was panic about what health impact these experiments could have had. Some who lived in the Dorset area looked at birth defects and health problems that plagued their communities and believed the biological warfare experiments were to blame. A study conducted after the files were released found there was little chance any health problems were caused by the experiments, with the possible exception of people with underlying health conditions. Despite the study, many people believe that either these experiments or others that remain top secret were to blame for unexplained health problems. Number 1. The miners' strike of the 1980s was one of the biggest turning points in recent British history. After a long standoff against the mining communities, the government of Margaret Thatcher was eventually able to break the strikes and change the landscape of these same communities. For some, the breaking of the strike could only be explained by covert activity. For others, this seemed more like a conspiracy theory than anything that actually happened. But whistleblowers in 1990 revealed there was more truth to this than anybody expected. The strikes were led by the National Union of Mine Workers, who were protesting the closure of mines. Opposing them was the Thatcher government. For years, various unions have been able to cause havoc for governments, and Thatcher wanted to break the strength of one of the biggest unions in the country. As pickets and rallies took place, especially in the north of England, Scotland, and Wales, the man leading these strikes came under intense scrutiny. Stories about Arthur Scargill, president of the union, appeared in daily newspapers. Some of these papers continued to publish defamatory stories about Scargill, even long after the strikes were over. Any violence at the strikes was also widely covered, even when it could be proven that the violence didn't come from the strikers themselves. Some suspected that police or intelligence agencies had infiltrated the union. In 1990, it would be revealed that much more than this had been done. The tip came from a staff member at GCHQ, a UK government intelligence agency, mostly known today for wiretapping. The staff member had spoken to the Guardian newspaper, revealing that the phones and other electronics of high-ranking trade unionists had been tapped. Even the restaurants that Scargill and other unionists frequented had been bugged. A book and a Channel 4 documentary released around the same time shed light on other tactics that had been used. These included planting smear campaigns in the newspapers and allegedly even planting an MI5 agent as one of the top-ranking officials within the union. MI5's involvement in the union had become so great that the police had actually complained that intelligence agents were getting in the way of their own investigations. These stories were brought up in Parliament, but MI5 insisted that they'd only become involved in the strike to counter subversion. They believed that foreign agents and communists were trying to bring down British democracy and were using the chaos brought by the strike action as a cover. Some believed this story, but more recent documents uncovered in 2024 proved that MI5 went further than that. In May of 1984, the courts ruled that the strike was illegal, as it hadn't gone through the proper ballot system. They ordered the union to call off the strike. When they didn't, they were ordered to pay a fine. By this point, all the union's money had disappeared into foreign bank accounts. A sequester was ordered by the courts to find the money, and at first they had no luck. But suddenly, at the start of 1985, those funds were uncovered. The sequester claimed that they'd been tipped off by bankers with knowledge of the transactions, but a memo written by a cabinet secretary revealed that MI5 was the source of the knowledge. The sequester had come to the secretary seeking help, and he'd put them in touch with an MI5 agent. In the memo to the Prime Minister, he wrote that the identity of this man was never revealed, but it wouldn't take Sherlock Holmes to deduce that he was a member of the intelligence agency. The information passed on had been uncovered through wiretapping and other espionage techniques, and was passed on in the hopes that the sequester would find out about any foreign funding for the strikes. But even the government official writing the memo was uncertain how they could argue that what was done was the national interest. By the time any of this information was revealed, the damage to the strikes, unions, and communities they represented had already been done. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you liked this video, be sure to hit that like button. Also, don't forget to subscribe and click that notification bell to keep up to date with all of our future uploads. But my name is Ty Knotts, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.